Wilson, County Councillor for Godmanchester, Huntingdon South. I think as there are some new officers, just for your benefit, we'll whiz round the table, by which time Nick may well be here, and then we'll press on with our audit and accounts meeting. Alison.
I'm Alison Whelan. I am Councillor for Ely North.
Chris Bowden, Councillor for Whittlesea North.
Alan Sharp, Councillor for the Wood Ditton Ward Division.
Ellie Todd, Strategic Finance Manager. I'll let Justine explain. I'm taking over from Justine.
So I'm Justine Hartley. I'm the Strategic Finance Manager who's been covering the corporate portfolio for the last 6 months, including the close down of the accounts, while Ellie's been on maternity leave, but she's back now. So you'll see her at future audit committee meetings, not me. I'm moving on to adults and health.
Hi, I'm Dean Leather. I'm the Service Improvement and Income Manager, focused on debt and income at the moment.
Hi, Alison Balcombe, Head of Finance Operations, responsible for debt and income in terms of this paper. Been enrolled for 6 months with regards to debt.
Afternoon, Simone Taylor, County Councillor for Amesbury St Neots.
Oh, yeah. Councillor McMaguire, the Exley and Facet Division.
I'm Dawn Kay by Clark Leeds Meetings. And I'm Monica Balaj, and I'm a Democratic Services Assistant.
And Neil, who are you?
Hi, I'm Neil Hunt. I'm the Head of Internal Audits and Risk at Cambridgeshire County Council.
How much of that could you hear? Because I'm conscious some of us were sitting slightly closer to our microphones than others.
I could hear that perfectly, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Well, let's press on then. You've all received the agenda. First of all, Dawn, do we have any apologies?
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Does any member wish to disclose any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interests?
Thank you, Chair. Just as a matter of caution, I'd like to state, although it's not a declarable interest, that I am a member of the Audit Registration Committee for the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, which is responsible on an annual basis for permitting EY to conduct audits. To manage that conflict, I have no part to play at all in the Audit Registration Committee in any decisions made on EY, nor do I participate in any conversations, nor do I receive any papers.
Okay, sounds fine, but you will contribute when we get to EY's views on our accounts. Excellent, thank you. So now I need to read the statement that Dawn's kindly provided. I would like to begin by welcoming both committee members and those of the members of the public who have joined us today at Bluntsham Village Hall. This is in order to follow the guidelines we've received from Public Health to manage an indoor meeting of this size during a COVID pandemic. Some officers will be joining us remotely via Zoom. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask everyone present to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. The meeting room has been arranged to comply with public health guidance on COVID safety. On their advice, committee members and officers will remove their face coverings at the start of the meeting and replace them at the end. This is to minimise the number of hand-to-face contacts. However, could I ask members of the public and press to keep their masks on? There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. So there's an exit there and there's an exit back where we came, and the cars where you all parked at the front. Do you want to just email or try and ring Nick just to confirm he's coming to the right place? He should know because he was on the pre-meet call. Moving on, item 2 is petitions and public questions. We've received neither. So we move on to item 3, which is the debt management update. And can I ask Alison Balcom, Head of Finance Operations, and Dean Leather to present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the second report since we took over the management of debt in December 2020. For those of you at the last meeting, there's a slight change in the format. Councillor Maguire, I believe you were at the last meeting, through the service improvements we've done with the reporting. So I just want to point out an anomaly in the recommendations. It should say at the end of Q3, not at the end of Q1. Okay.
So just to be clear, in case you missed that, we'll get a further update in September-ish.
Yeah.
On the position at the end of Q3, because the information we've got today is at the end of Q1.
Yeah. Okay. So because we've changed the reporting, it's not going to be apples for apples. So if we're doing a measure on the debt position at the point we produced the last report, we've made a 360k improvement on the debt with the exclusion of the CCG, which we'll talk through later. In addition to what we've reported, we're expecting an extra 480k through property sales. Obviously, through the pandemic, there's been delays in some property sales, but we've seen a boom during June, and solicitors are liaising with us, so we're expecting an additional 480k in what's reported. So I'm going to hand over to Dean, who's going to talk through the stats. Then I'll go back and talk through the service improvements and what we're going to do moving forward.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Alison. Yes, as Alison said, we've got a new debt reporting pack that looks to break down the debt by directorate, but also shows some trends, just so we know whether we're improving or the performance is getting slightly worse. So looking at the first table there, it shows the debt by directorate, and it shows within the second column the current month, so the current debt that was due at the end of Q1, so end of June, and the previous month, so the debt that would have been due at the end of May, so the position then. As this goes on, obviously the report gets more full and we've got more data. We will start showing comparisons based on the last quarter and the last year as well, but at the moment we haven't got that level of data. As you can see then, what we do is some trend analysis. So it just shows you from some arrows whether the performance is going up, so i.e. the debt is going down, or whether it's static, so it's going across, it's an amber arrow, or whether performance has dropped off slightly within the period. Is there any questions initially over that view of data?
Yeah, if I may, thanks. I'm not sure if Alison or is going to respond to it. If I understand the footnote below the overall age debt by debt status part in 2.1, the last year figure, 26 million pound effectively, is that the overall for the whole year? So even though we're only in partial year, we're almost, given that previous.
Sorry,
so it just seems an awful lot for 1 year, given what we've got for the part year.
No, what the figures are showing is a snapshot. So they show the outstanding debt at a point in time. So all those figures are monthly figures of what was outstanding at a particular point of time.
Oh, so it's a rollover type figure.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, so overall, the figures that are shown are basically the total amount that was due in column 2 for 30th of June. In column 3, it will be what was due as at the end of May, and last year was what was due this time last year in its entirety, but we can't break it down by directorate or debt status.
Yeah.
Before you go on, Dean, I think Chris has got a question on this bit.
Yes, thank you. I I read this report and I was a little bit disappointed by it until I read the note below explaining that you've had a change of accounting package, a new reporting pack. It will be ever so much more useful when you do have more than a year's data so that we can compare apples with apples, as you said, rather than what we've got. I fully accept this is the best you can give us with the information that you've got at the moment. So it's a little bit frustrating. I was interested in two things in this particular table. The first was against LGSS law, which was the LGSS law limited, that was just blank. Now, is that because, astonishingly, we've now got to the stage where there are no overdue debts, or is it because you are setting off the debts against the amounts of money which are due to LGSS law limited?
Thank you. My understanding is with the recategorisation of debt by directorates and also the payments that have come in since the last report, there is no debt now classified under LGSS law that they owe us at this point in time.
Well, as a former director of LGSS Law Limited, I can say that that is both astonishing and extremely welcome. But thank you very much for that. The second question which occurred to me was the unapplied monies, and I just wonder if you could explain about the unapplied monies. Are these receipts which haven't been applied to individual accounts? They haven't been applied to anything at all? They haven't been matched? Exactly what are the unapplied monies?
Sure, the unapplied total is payments that haven't been allocated to a particular invoice. They might have been allocated to a customer's account, but not a particular invoice. And the reason we therefore can't apply it by directorate is because some customers serve multiple directorates. So therefore it has to remain as unapplied at this point until we can apply it to a correct invoice or refund it.
No, that's excellent. Very, very good answer. Thank you, Chair. One of the things which I recall very much when LGSS was involved tremendously in a lot of the dealing with the invoicing was the amount of time it took to be able to apply because of differences, sometimes as part of the system, but sometimes just because there were disagreements between the two parties. And I just wonder how quickly does that unapplied money get applied, or is there a base figure there which stays unapplied for months, if not even longer?
Unfortunately, there is some base data that's there for a long period of time, and some of that is because of our work with the CCGs as well. So some of it is where they've paid us an amount of money and they're saying it's for X invoices, but some of them might have already been cleared. So therefore it's sitting on the account until we unpick the full picture with the CCGs, and then we'll be able to apply it correctly and it will drop off.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. Thank you for mentioning the CCGs. We were told at the Strategy and Resources meeting last week that some £1.3 million of monies received from the CCG has gone in, or from the NHS, sorry, we were told it wasn't, we weren't told specifically CCG, I just assumed it was. We were told that £1.3 million of money had been put into a reserve rather than, am I correctly thinking that wouldn't be recorded here?
I'm not sure if we're going to come on to that later on in the pack, but yeah.
Oh, we will, fine, I'll wait.
Yeah, hang on for that one, Chris, and then we'll do the CCG in a moment. Max got a question, and then if we can move on to the next.
Chairman, I've just realised that my question actually applies to paragraph 2.2, which I don't think Alison actually. So I'll wait until they've actually presented that.
So Dean, is there anything that you want to tell us about the next table about the overall age debt, and very quickly just remind people, because I didn't know, what DCA and pre-Dunning cycle mean?
Sure, sorry for the terminology, I do apologise. So the next table is showing basically the same data, but by the status of the debt. So therefore, for example, what level of debt is within the automatic Dunning cycle, and the automatic Dunning cycle is automatic reminder letters being sent out by the system. So that basically means the invoices have just become due and they're going through an automatic cycle within the system reminder process. DCA is debt collection agency, so it's the debts we've got sat with an external agency that are chasing those debts on our behalf. So most of what's happened there is it's gone through the automatic Dunning cycle, the in-house team has then tried to collect the money and for some reason hasn't been able to. negotiate the money or collect the money. So therefore, some of the cases will be referred to an external debt recovery agency as an extension to the debt process. And the other statuses within that report just enable the management to understand where we've got the biggest problems and where the biggest challenges are. So we can see within the report last month that most of the debt was within the automatic dunning cycle, where this month most of it's within the pre-dunning cycle, automatic dunning cycle, or sat with the service. And what we mean by sat with the service is it's where the debt team have had to refer the debt back to the relevant service for further information or guidance.
Okay. I think silence is, that's helpful, thank you. So can we move on to the next bits, particularly about the CCG?
So, yeah, in terms of the CCG debt, the level that's outstanding is still pretty static with what it was previously. But that's the level of debt that hasn't had any income matched to it. As you heard at Strategy and Resources Committee, they have paid us, actually it's just over 2 million, I believe, which we've put into the reserve to offset against invoices once we're able to match them to the individual invoices and clear them off the system as part of resolving all of this old debt. So most of this is quite old, and we're pretty much at the stage where it's agreed now that it'll all be settled, but they're just waiting for the services to completely agree what the process will be going forwards to make sure we don't get any more debt that arises like this into the future. And then at that point, the rest, we're told, will be paid, and that earmark reserve will be cleared, and all of this will come off of the money that's sitting on those individual invoices on the debt register, because we'll match it at that stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for that explanation, which is extremely helpful, and thank you for getting the number right. I'd forgotten it was over 2 million rather than over 1 million. But given that, so what happened was that we received, and I imagine it's not just in one payment, but over a number of payments, we received over £2 million, but they weren't put on the system as unapplied. They've been treated in a very different way, and are now being shown as a reserve, I understand.
I think, so if it sits in unapplied, then that's really income that we don't quite know what to do with. This income, we know what it's for, but we don't know which invoices individually to match it against. So I think it was trying to distinguish between a very big unapplied pot that we didn't know what it was, whereas this one we did, so we sort of separated it out.
Really just coming back in on that, two questions. One is what, and it may be difficult to say at the moment, but what level of write-off do we think that we're going to have to, because we can't reconcile? And two, you mentioned income, but we've already got the income in the system, presumably as part of the sales invoices, so maybe it's a question of terminology, because it's obviously cash rather than matching against the invoices we've got.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. The income's already recognised.
I'm used to commercial accounting rather than SIPFA accounting. Let's put it like that.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's my terminology. So yes, the income is recognised in the system. The cash has come in and will be applied. In terms of write-off, I have to admit I don't know the number. I took over adults on Monday, so I'm kind of new to all of this, but I don't think it's very significant. I think we've got to a really good place where we've managed to reach an agreement that works well for both parties, so I'd have to follow that up. But
can we record that as an action that you'll provide us an update on that when you've got it? Thanks, Justin.
And just to come back in very quickly, James.
Yeah, go on, Alan, and then I know Mac's got a question.
From what you were saying, this is historic, so once we've done this exercise, that should be it, and going forward, we're going to hopefully be in a better situation.
So that's exactly why we've not got the money yet, because they're saying we've got to agree the processes completely. So we've got to know that this isn't going to happen again, and then we'll settle the whole thing. So it's just, as I understand it now, finalising how it will work going forwards to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Sorry, let's try Mac and then we'll try Chris.
Yeah, I think Justin's probably answered part of my question, so I'll modify what just do part of it, because I wasn't aware that you'd actually had some money in which you put into an earmark reserve, presumably, right? But it just seems to me, and I know we've had this discussion many times with CCG, the time it takes to actually get settlement, get agreement with them as to what is actually a valid invoice and what is not. And so it continues, and I just can't help wonder, even though it's public money both ways, whichever way you're looking at it, whether, if we are right, for instance, in terms of whether we're able to apply penalties in some way to it once it's finally settled, because it does seem daft, doesn't it? It's obvious, you know, it's sitting in their bank rather than ours, you know. So, and I just wonder what the legal position was, and are we allowed to do such a thing? That's a difficult one. That's throwing you over. Sorry.
Coming from the NHS, that would depend on any contractual arrangements with any of the contracted invoices or what have you. So we can have a look at that, Justine. And yeah, depends on any contracts. Just depends. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't.
Chris.
I possibly should have said at the beginning that I look at this from more than one perspective, given that I was the Finance and Performance Board member for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough CCG. So I've heard this argument from the other side, and it's interesting that it's looked at very differently depending on which side of the fence you are. But coming back to the numbers that we've got in front of us, my understanding then is that the debtor figure that we are shown here, which is just over 22 million, 2 million of that has already been paid, just over. We just don't know exactly which invoices they are. But there is another £2 million which isn't reflected in receipts, which isn't reflected in this table.
So are the CCG numbers in the tables above, or are they separate?
The CCG cash you've had in isn't included in the figures above, because we wouldn't be able to include it. So yes, we've had an additional 2 million in, which will reduce the debt figure once it's applied the relevant invoices.
And my question at Strategy and Resources was, fine, I can almost understand what's being done, but it seems to me that at the year end, our debtor position was 2 million less than we'd be showing from the comparable table that we've got here. So really, our debtor figure should be reduced by that 2 million. We shouldn't be showing that 2 million as being some sort of separate reserve.
We can definitely take an action away to include that type of analysis going forward in this packet. That would be useful.
That's helpful, and I'd be really interested if there are any other ones like this which have been done in the same way. That would be quite interesting. I'm more interested in what happens in the year-end figures for the 31st of March 2021. And if we have received £2 million in payment of a debt, and that debtor is still shown in full in debtors, it just seems wrong to me.
Presumably, Michelle or Justine, the £2 million is shown somewhere in the accounts because it's money we've received. So it may not be in debtors, but it will be on some income somewhere.
Yes, Councillor Bowden is correct that the debtor will be overstated by £2 million and therefore also earmarked reserves theoretically in a true accounting sense will also be overstated by 2 million. Those should, in line with the code, be offset. However, £2 million is not material by a long way, so it's not something we would need to adjust for in the accounts.
I would accept, Chair, that it's under the materiality level, but it just feels wrong, to be quite honest, deliberately to have set it up this way and then not voluntarily to have made the adjustment at year end. And it just rang alarm bells to me. And I'm sure you can understand why it rang alarm bells, because it's not in accordance with standard accounting practice.
Absolutely, and this is, as far as I'm aware, the first time that this has happened, and we will certainly have a discussion about whether that would be appropriate to do again in the future.
Okay. Go on, Mac, and then I'll...
I'll try not to prolong this, Chairman, because I know it's a difficult one. Notwithstanding what's just been said, I presume the fact that it's sitting in reserves is because somebody hasn't yet been able to do a reconciliation, and therefore, and I presume again that that's probably a time-consuming job, but presumably there's a schedule to actually reconcile and match the payment to those invoices. And it'd be useful to know how long we think that'll take before we can actually take it out of reserves and allocate it to the age debt.
So usually, if you think about when somebody pays an invoice, they tell you what it is they're paying. But of course they didn't. They just made a bulk payment against this whole range of invoices. So really we're waiting for the end point when the whole thing is settled, and then everything will be cleared in one go.
Mac, just put your mic.
Sorry, unusual from a, because from a commercial point of view, somebody ought to be getting, but it sounds like it's payment in advance, acknowledging that many of the invoices are genuine and they don't need to be, and they would need to be agreed. It's simply a payment in advance, but it does make life extremely difficult, notwithstanding the materiality when we get the audit reports come out. But to Joe Public, it looks weird, doesn't it? Public documents. So just saying it, but it's a shame that we can't get them somehow a system in this day and age which actually says, yes, we acknowledge that these invoices are valid. We haven't yet checked these to see the amounts are correct, but we'll allocate an amount to cover those.
Right.
I think we're all very keen to sort it so that going forwards, we know exactly, we don't have these issues arising and everything's paid on a more timely basis. This is a very historic problem we're just trying to resolve. So.
Right, last point from Chris, then I'm going to make a comment or a question, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think there may be some misunderstanding for some members of the committee hearing about this being called a payment in advance. My understanding is it's a payment for items which are 3 or 4 years old in some cases. But I think that the point that I would just like to make is I would hope that in a year's time we're not going to be having the same conversation. And I say that without being, I realise the difficulty because this isn't something which is simple. It actually takes two sides to talk the same language and be in the same room at the same time and do it. And that's much more difficult than it might sound. And I'm delighted to hear that Alison has come from the NHS side because she'll understand the different language that is spoken there. Because they view the local authority side as the ones who speak the foreign language. So it's good to have an interpreter, and I very much hope that we will hear that this has been resolved fairly soon. And I wonder, when it is resolved, could the Audit Committee be informed, please?
I think it would be excellent if we could be informed. My concern is whether the CCG will actually be in existence in a year's time, because I thought of all the changes that were happening within the NHS, they may not be, but somebody can, Chris, you probably know that better than me.
The beauty of government is that there are always successor authorities and successor bodies. So regardless of what's going to be happening, there will be someone to talk to. The trouble is they probably will have no knowledge about all of this and they will start again from scratch. But there were always successor bodies.
And if there's a successor body that may not be their top priority either. So just for the purposes of clarifying the paper and the minutes, in 2.2 it says the current outstanding debt with the CCG is approximately 5.6. So is that right, or is it 5.6 minus about 2 million?
Our debt figure shows 5.6, so it's actually 5.6 less the 2 million. So
in the first quarter of 2021, what was the in-year collection position for that year, so that I can compare it with the in-year position for this year, which we are told for 21-22. Now, having said that, and said that it would be normally useful in the special circumstances which existed at the end of the first quarter in 2021, maybe it wouldn't have been that useful in this particular case. But again, it's a case of having apples with apples. So having the comparison from the previous year about what the situation was in that year would have been extremely helpful, rather than just relating to the in-year collection.
Yeah, we can definitely look at that. We were trying to keep the pack fairly similar to the last pack that was submitted to the committee. We could also provide figures that actually tell you the performance within a 90-day period as well, if that would be helpful. So you can see how quickly that cash flow is coming back into the business rather than over a whole year. So if that would be useful, we could include that for future months.
I think we would like to see that, even if it's more paper or more virtual paper. Yeah, sorry, I did rush on a bit. So was there anything more on that paper that you wanted to draw our attention to? I've said about all the good stuff that you're doing because I've read it and talked to you about it previously, but we haven't actually discussed it as a committee. Is there anything you would like to particularly highlight?
I suppose 2.6 we probably don't need to go through, but whether Alison might want to give an update on the service improvements that she's implemented recently.
Yeah, so after, obviously, we took over in December 2020, and we've done quite a lot of work analysing the data, hence breaking down the report and changing the report. So we're at a stage now where we've put a 24-point action plan in place, which we're going to take forward over the next few months. There's some quick wins in there in terms of process efficiencies within the system, which go through our change control process. that we're starting to implement those. We want to put some process improvements in around the dunning cycle to improve the customer experience. At present, they only get a reminder at invoice level. If I was a customer, I would like a reminder to see the entire debt position. So we're actually scoping that out at the moment. So that's if somebody calls in, they can call in about their overall debt position. And that's the major change. We're working with adult social care on that. And I think that will bring us efficiencies as well as improving the customer experience. So if there any other questions, they're happy to share that. Obviously, we've got that plan. There's nothing in there that's confidential. It's
Okay. Are there any other questions? I think it'd be good to share the plan when you can. Go on, Simone.
Yeah, I was just looking at the future improvements. Interested in the write-off process, how that improvement would be different, because you're looking at write-off process is now driven through workflows rather than the previous manual process. Just explain that to me a little bit, because I don't know.
I think what we're saying here is write-offs are now fully managed within the debt system itself. So once a debt needs to be written off, work flows through from the debt team to the budget holder for approval, and then through to the relevant people within the scheme of delegation to approve that write-off. Where previously a lot of that process was manual and outside of the system, so that's all within the system with better audit trail and faster approval.
And ultimately, it goes to Tom Kelly to review and challenge if need be.
Okay, no other questions, so we move on to the next item. And welcome, Tom. I can just about see you in front of the Golden Gate Bridge again. But, so we move on to Neil and your annual governance statement.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'm going to pass it over to Maria Claydon, who's the audit manager within the internal audit service. So over to you, Maria.
Thanks, Neil. So hi everyone. I'm going to just quickly introduce the paper on the annual governance statement. This is a statutory document which forms part of the annual statement of accounts to report on key elements of the Council's governance framework, the effectiveness of those arrangements in year and how that's been monitored, any known governance issues and the plans that the Council has in place to address them. So this is a draft version of the annual governance statement for 2020 to 2021, and it's presented to Audit and Accounts Committee to ensure that it reflects the committee's knowledge and experience of the Council's governance systems. So following this meeting and any further updates, the final version will go to be signed off by the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council. It's a document which is compiled by internal audit, partly based on the work we do, also based on other things such as assurance statements from directors, which is outlined at section 2 of the covering report. I think particularly for this year, I would highlight that the coronavirus pandemic has understandably impacted the Council's normal governance processes. And in order to fully reflect that, section 3 of the annual governance statement focuses on the key governance issues that were raised by the pandemic, how those have been handled in year, and there are sections detailing in particular the role of JMT, the role of the Director of Public and how risk management operated during that period as well. Ultimately, the statement recognises that COVID is a significant governance issue for the organisation. However, there are currently no proposed actions to be undertaken to address the governance issue because governance frameworks have already been updated where necessary on a temporary or permanent basis to address this. So although we've noted a significant governance issue, there's no action plan to address that because we feel that it has largely been addressed already in year. So that is the annual governance statement, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any comments, questions from anybody? It's a very comprehensive description of things that have gone on. I've got two things. One, just to raise to the committee's attention that Neil and Mairead have given their assessment of lost it now. On the basis of the audit work undertaken during 2020-21 financial year, a strong satisfactory assurance opinion has been reached, which I think in the greater scheme of things is entirely fair. It identifies that there are some really good practices going on in many parts of the business, but equally, as has been identified through their recommendations for various bits of audit, there are some further improvements to be made. So I think on balance that's a sensible thing to say. The other concern that I'd got was whether the description about what happened during the COVID pandemic is adequately described. So it talks a lot about how people have been redeployed and how we've got additional money from government to deal with the pandemic, which has been great. But it doesn't, to my mind, describe fully the impact on the day-to-day outputs of our business. Now, Dawn has been in touch with Tom Barden to see whether he's got any more information, and it may be that through some of the reports that have gone through the council, there is information which can be retrieved, and we just have to decide then whether or not we include something. But you can imagine, just off the top of your head, if the waste recycling centres were closed because of a COVID outbreak and we were all told to stay at home, then they have collected less waste. Equally, if all the libraries were closed, we lent less books. Well, that's fine. But what has happened to the elderly people in care homes and the children who needed support and some of the other essential parts of our business? And that was an area which I didn't feel was fully described in here. So I was going to suggest to Neil that we try and see whether there's anything we can add in just to strengthen that element. Apart from that,
thanks, Chair. We certainly will do that. Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. Apart from that, is there anything else that anybody has got? No. Okay. Thank you very much. So we've considered the annual governance statement, and we believe it's consistent with the committee's own perspective on internal control within the council and the definition of significant governance and control issues given in paragraph 3.2 of the report. Yes? Yes. Excellent. Let's move on then to item 5, which are the draft Cambridgeshire County Council Statement of Accounts 2021. And can I ask Justin and Ellie to and Michelle to present this report? And a triple act amongst our illustrious ladies. If you just start, Justin, and then pass on as you wish. And don't forget Tom is in the background if you want to pass difficult questions to him.
Okay, thank you, Chair. First of all, to start really just to say, obviously we're calling this the draft statement of accounts, but this is kind of the draft of the draft. So we have to publish a formal draft statement of accounts by next Friday. What we're doing today is bringing this to you for you to view before we publish that draft. So we're in a good position this year because in the previous years we've had to publish by the 31st of May, which has made it very tight, and by the time it's come to Audit Committee, it's already been published. This one hasn't been published, and so you've got the chance to input to it beforehand because the deadlines have been pushed back this year from the 31st of May for publication to the 31st of July. So you will see some bits that are sort of highlighted in yellow. Those are bits that we're still working on. In particular, there's one big note on fair value that we're waiting for input from our external valuers on. But really, we're bringing it here for your comments today and really value anything that you pick up. Just to put into the context where this particular document sits in what we'll fully publish, what you've got in front of you is the County Council's bit of the accounts. When we publish, we will also publish group accounts that consolidate this land's accounts with ours. They're with their auditors at the moment. and we are working on bringing that in. The pension fund accounts went to the pension committee this morning, and so those will come back to this committee later, because obviously you are responsible for approving the whole thing, but it will be quite a long time before we approve the final published accounts. It will be some months down the line, and the annual governance statement obviously you have just looked at. In terms of the outturn position, you'll see in here we talk about a £6.3 million underspend, which is what was reported for those of you who were at Strategy and Resources in the Integrated Financial Management Report, and that's all been transferred to the General Fund. Reserves, quite a significant increase in earmarked reserves this year, and quite a lot of that is to do with unspent COVID money. Some of that is unring-fenced money, and GPC, as it was approved, the transfer of that to an earmarked reserve sometime back in last year. Some of that is very explicitly given for specific things that which we have to spend it on. So that's pushed up the earmarked reserves. Another big number that you might want to note is to do with the city deal. So we have got agreed funding of 200 million, which we won't receive we will receive at 40 million a year over 5 years. This is round 2 of the city deal funding, and when we had round 1, there was discussion with the auditors about how it would be accounted for, and the view was, because we have met the milestones for it now, we will get that 200 million. It all has to be recognised in 2021, and so that's pushing up both our short-term and our long-term debtor balances, because we'll get 40 million in the current financial year and then 40 million for the next 3 years going forwards as well. In terms of the audit of these accounts, obviously once we publish them, then they will go to the auditors. Usually you would see the audit plan around now, and the audit would be starting quite imminently. I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of the Redmond Review and the sort of look at external audit in the local authority sector. And one of the things that talks about is capacity, and lack of capacity really, as well as fees and all sorts of other things. And that's, from that came the sort of movement of dates backwards in terms of publication, because so many people weren't meeting it. EY, as a result of that, are scheduling our audit this year to start in October. So draft accounts are due by the 31st of July. Full accounts are due by the 30th of September. We won't be able to meet that because EY will not have audited our accounts by then. So we will have to publish a statement to say that those will be late. And then EY will come and audit our accounts from October. So they will bring their audit plan to this committee in September for you to review before that main work starts. In terms of the pensions accounts, the audit plan went to Pensions Committee this morning, I believe. I think some of you were there. That will come to this committee as well. Actually, we're going to circulate it to this committee for information reflecting any comments back from Pensions Committee, but it will come to the September meeting as well. The pensions audit is already underway, and EY will be bringing initial findings to the next meeting of this committee. Just wanted to pick up a last bit in terms of value for money opinions. And those who've been around on the audit committee for a while will know that we are still waiting some very long-dated value for money opinions from BDO, our previous auditors before EY took over. Councillor Shellens had communicated a lot with BDO and with public sector audit appointments, the people who appoint the auditors, to try to resolve these issues, but as yet they are still not resolved. Tom has been quite involved in that and has a meeting, I believe, with them next week with Gillian Beasley to try to get to a position where we can start to resolve some of those things. And there's a knock-on impact from BDO not clearing their value for money work that EY then are not clearing theirs either. EY have done a lot of work ready for that, so that once the BDO issue is resolved, then they can clear theirs up quite quickly, hopefully. But we are still waiting for objections back to 2016-17 and value for money opinions from 17-18 onwards to be finalised. And I think that's probably about what I wanted to say, but very happy to take any questions, or anything that you found in the accounts that you think might be wrong. We'd be very grateful to have those sorted before we publish.
So there was that one a point that I thought I got wrong, or you'd got wrong.
I don't know whether you wanted me to bring that to everybody's attention, Councillor Wilson, or you wanted to see if anybody else had spotted it as well.
Well, let's do it before
Let's do it first,
Chris tells us we've got it wrong.
Okay. So on page 48, there's a table that looks at the revised net budget and the outturn and the year-end position that talks about the 6.3 million that I referred to earlier. The revised net budget figure there, that 384.1, is not the correct figure. And so therefore when you take the outturn off of it, you don't get the 6.3 million variance. So we will be correcting that figure to the 400 and I've lost the figure now, 400 something that it should be. The wrong figure got picked up out of the analysis, I'm afraid.
There you go, just to demonstrate that I had read it and I did understand the table correctly, or how it was supposed to be correctly. Just before Chris and others come in, could we just record that Tom and Julian are going to see BDO next week, that we are extremely frustrated that this has taken so long to resolve, and if it's helpful I will also write to BDO or be happy to contact the partner to try and progress it quickly. Are you all comfortable with that, presumably? Excellent, thank you. Right, Chris and then Matt.
Thank you, Joe. Before dealing with any figures within here, I have some concern about what is happening with the audit. Now, what happened last year was there was quite a bit of shuffling round of audit dates, which happened primarily to make sure that county councils managed to get their audits done as quickly as possible, which is fair enough given the greater vulnerability that county councils have in a whole host of different ways. And I was disappointed when I first saw EY's regional public sector audit timetable to see that Cambridgeshire County Council had been put into phase 5, which is the October date that's been talked about, given that that's rather later than the other county councils such as Suffolk or Norfolk or West Suffolk or whatever, all of whom are earlier than us. And I was wondering if that was down to EY or whether there was some issue as far as Cambridgeshire was concerned which caused us to be put as low down in the pecking order as phase 5. But what worried me further on top of that in terms of timing was what we heard today in the pensions committee, because the pension scheme was included in phase 1 and should have had their audit completed by the week starting the 5th of July. Yet we were told they're still in the middle of the audit work which is being done there. So I'm just wondering, have we got a situation where EY are already behind on their schedule, and if so, if they haven't even completed the phase 1 items yet, and they should be well through the phase, made a good start on the phase 2 audits, are we in danger of not getting our phase 5 audit completed in time? And if so, what sort of timing may there be? And one of the reasons for asking this is, it causes so much confusion and difficulty with planning for staff as much as anything else. Staff take their holidays based on when they expect that they're going to need to be present to be able to answer questions. And if we have any advance warning that EY might not be living up to their timetable, I think it's really important that we know that as quickly as possible so that we can amend our own arrangements.
Okay, thank you. And Matt, was yours on a different point?
Mine is that concern again that, you know, we've been put back and EY, and we know this is happening right across the piece, isn't it? That happens. But knowing what effect it has on our staff, on you, trying to prepare your audit, and then notwithstanding, you know, Chris has already said about holidays and these sort of things, is the impact. Is that being recognised nationally, if the National Audit Office or whatever? I mean, they're not going to compensate us. I know that, too naive to expect that, but I just can't help thinking that sometimes we, at our level, don't see or appreciate the anger that may be being expressed nationally over that, you know, in national government in particular, to what they're doing to address it.
Justin, do you want to
try to answer some of those?
Feel free to.
Tom
is there as well, so
I don't know whether Tom wants to go first or whether I should go first.
Go on, Tom.
Yeah, if you can hear me, I'll just come in because we did discuss quite closely with EY the timing of the audit this year. They've taken a bit of a different approach this year in that in the Eastern Region team they're doing one county council at a time really, or making sure they're spaced in sequence. you're right that we're after Norfolk and Suffolk, for instance, and I think that's sensible. Understand the reasons for doing that, and there are a number of phases beyond us as well, and we have to be mindful that we didn't get last year's accounts signed until the 31st of March, and we needed some preparation and recovery time for the internal team. So, if we'd been given the choice, I think we would have picked August, but we were clear we wouldn't have been ready for phase 1 or 2. So October is a bit of a compromise. I think we're working closely with EY. I'm confident they will start with us in October as planned. They've always been reliable on that point since we've worked with them. Where I do have more concern is that they are predicting the audit will be complete in 5 to 6 weeks, I think, and that seems unduly optimistic, I think, compared to where we've been in recent years. And we know even the final stages of the audit, once we're largely complete with the field work, can take 3 or 4 weeks. So we will need to monitor that closely and ensure we've got adequate resource. And you're absolutely right to say this is a national issue, and as Justine's already referred to the Redmond review, and we've had the impact of the deadlines moving backwards for publication, but not to the same extent for audit. Actually, somewhat surprisingly, the government, I think, has announced an additional 15 million that will be distributed across the sector to kind of reflect that audit fees are increasing. There needs to be further investment in the sector because we've ended up in a difficult place for the auditors. I don't think we know Cambridgeshire's allocation yet, but there will be some form of compensation for the additional cost and burden that we've got. But as you'll see, local government accounts are extremely complicated, and the regulatory environment for external auditors isn't getting any easier either. But really important, we did get through that October audit promptly this year and sign earlier than the 31st of March to show progress.
I think we hear what you say. Is there anything else there's nothing else we can do, really, is there? I mean, it's not desirable. I can imagine you wouldn't actually want the auditors descending in August anyway, because a lot of people would want to be on holiday for some of that time. But September or previously would have been better. Chris?
With respect, Chair, you underestimate the dedication that finance staff have. If an audit takes place in August, they will not take their holidays in August. And finance staff do have a very loyal, in any organisation, they do work around what they're required to do. But the point I was making before, and I don't think it's been answered, is we were given a bit of a warning shot potentially this morning that EY are already behind schedule. Are we keeping in close touch with them to make sure that they're actually going to meet the timescale that they said would be met for phase 5 audits? Or is there a danger that they're already slipping behind and we need to plan for a later time for the actual audit work taking place?
I don't know whether Tom wants to pick up on that or not. From my perspective, that's the first I've heard of it. So I think we need to go back and have that discussion with them. But just in terms of our audit starting in October, what I would say is we are very much making the most of the fact that it's not in August by doing things that we've got time now with the published accounts published next week. Got a couple of months for the closed down team to really focus on some issues that have been around for a while and make sure we're as prepared and that audit goes as smoothly as possible. So yes, it would be nice to be earlier, but we are actually trying to make the very best of it. Tom, I don't know whether you can respond at all on the first point, whether you had any awareness in terms of the pensions audit?
No, I mean, I'm probably talking to EY probably every 3 or 4 weeks. I wasn't aware there was significant delays on the pension fund, and we certainly haven't been told there's any risk or delay to the main accounts audit starting in October.
Alison, is there anything you want to add? As you're obviously chair of the pension committee.
No, Chris has actually covered, exactly one of the things we talked about this morning, and one of the risks that we were concerned about this morning is, exactly that and the knock-on effect. What I would add is that I've been dealing with EY in other capacities, and they undoubtedly they are undoubtedly having capacity issues. They simply do not have people to be able to do it. On commercial audits, they are actually 4 months behind on their audit plans at the current time. So from the perspective of the firm that I actually work for, I actually managed to get the audit through eventually, but actually they were two months later than I was required to submit those accounts. So we know that EY are actually struggling now. You know, we refer to EY. I don't think that this is an EY problem. I think it is an audit problem. The regulatory environment that we're currently in, we're hearing day by day plans that are coming out which are going to change a lot of how they want to operate audits, which may change things for the future. But what we're seeing at this very current time is the firms do not seem to be able to keep to the timetables that they've actually been putting out. So I think it really, really is important that we're talking to them on a very, very regular basis to make sure that they have in their diary they are coming in on whatever date, and they will be coming in on that date. And I think we really need to have that almost signed in blood by them, because otherwise we will be trapped.
They will, of course, be here at your September committee as well. I mean, obviously, Tom and Ellie will follow that up in advance of that, but they will be here presenting their audit plan at the September committee. So.
And I probably should know this, but they're looking at the county council's accounts. Are they also looking at this land's accounts, and what's the timescale for that?
No, so this land's accounts are done by another company completely. So that's ongoing at the moment. So that will be well finished before we get to the county council's audit. They're doing the pension fund and the county council's accounts.
Okay, so there's no risk with auditing of this land's accounts. No, excellent. Okay, any other final comments? No? Sorry, go on, Chris.
Sorry, moving on from the timing of the audit to what's actually in front of us. I don't know how many people have read through this. If you have, then congratulations, at least on the member side, officer side, I know. But doesn't it just go to show what a nonsense it all is? Are accounts produced in this form actually usable and helpful to users of the accounts? And the answer, of course, is no. And every attempt which is made to make them better just makes them worse. Having the introductory statement, I've forgotten what it's exactly called now, the narrative, thank you very much indeed. Having the narrative only increased the amount of work which has to be audited and didn't really assist in understanding the numbers which are in here at all. And now we hear of suggestions that, yes, the numbers are far too complicated for the users of the accounts. We need to produce a simplified version as well. But the point is, it's as well. So as well as having the full amounts, full accounts, we then have a simplified version for those like us who have to try and make some sort of sense of it. So that's not a problem unique to Cambridgeshire, of course, but it really is getting to the stage, it's well past the stage where these accounts which are produced in this format just do not fulfill the function that they're meant to fulfill from our perspective. From whole government accounting perspective, that's a different matter, of course, but for anyone else, it is a nonsense. Nevertheless, I did look through them with great interest, and I thought that there was nothing enormously surprising until I got to note 19, which is on pages 70, 71 of the report, that is page 108 of our pack, which was the movement of reserves. And when I looked at those, I hope I've got them right, the adjustments between accounting basis and funding basis under regulations. And when I looked at those, what really struck me, and I'm sure it's going to be COVID related, but I'm going to mention it because it's such a substantial figure. The fact that we had 173,570,000 of capital grants and contributions unapplied to the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. Now this compared to, what, something more like 20 or 30 million the previous end of the financial year, so I haven't got it in front of me at the moment. So a massive, massive increase. I was astonished that the amount involved could be that large. I can imagine where it's come from, but I think it's a large enough variance and a large enough figure at the year end to justify asking officers just to comment on it.
Absolutely, it is a very large variance year on year, but it is in relation to the City Deal grant money. So because we've had to recognise 200 million of that this year, and we had none to recognise last year, you've suddenly got a huge swing. And it will always vary a little bit about timing and what conditions you've got on the grants as well, because of where they sit and whether they've actually been recognised in your income for that year. But the main driver for that is the city deal this year.
I'm very grateful, Chair, for that answer. My guess was wrong.
Well, it was good to ask then, wasn't it? Alan.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I share. I'll come on to my point in a minute. I share Chris's comments about the length of the reports, etc. I used to be responsible for the financial accounts of the prison service, which was an executive agency laid before Parliament and then consolidated into the MOJ, so I know what you're going through. Well, that wasn't this in the notes. My concern, it's been touched on actually just now, is around, I'm trying to get my head around the accounting of the GCP, in that on, it's page 57 and page 84, the notes of the accounts, where we're talking, as you've just touched on, we've recognised the £200 million grant funding in this year's accounts. Do we presumably then account for the income, the grant funding through these accounts and the expenditure?
Currently, yes.
But then in note 57, it also touches on that the GCP gets general local funding through Section 106 agreements with developers and private funding opportunities. So are those accounted through here, or do they go through? Everything's come through here, does it?
Yeah, because GCP doesn't exist as an entity in a legal sense.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get to. Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, just. Okay, so I just want to raise the issue of the narrative report on this land. Over the last 24 hours, we've had in the media allegations of financial mismanagement, huge overhang of debt, of cronyism, and of appalling conflicts of interest. So when I read the narrative report, which is very much rose-tinted spectacles and motherhood and apple pie, I ended up with a significant amount of cognitive dissonance. And as it happens, I cycle past the One Ditton Walk development every day, so I thought I'd just stop by there this morning and see what was going on. Because they're supposed to produce 40% of affordable property. This is the glossy brochure, and you can have a Henslow for 625,000 or a Bentham for 480,000. And so I think it's rather fortunate that the accounts of this land have not been able to be considered at this meeting today. And I think it's very important that when they are available, they are immediately circulated to the leaders and to this committee, and that we look at them very closely and very seriously. I have one last question, which is really about the structure of this land, to Tom. As I understand it, this is a wholly owned subsidiary of the County Council. In the university, we have wholly owned subsidiaries as well, the Cambridge University Press, for example. So if we wish to diversify, we could sell that. So my question is, what would we actually get from this land if we tried to sell it at the moment? Or is the only value in it the fact that the County Council is guarantor for about £130 million worth of debt that actually has no value at all? In the university, we can't sell Cambridge University Press because, not because of that, but because of our branding. We can't allow our brand to be used by people we can't control. So that's my question to Tom.
Tom, so two things there. One, can we confirm that we will be getting the accounts for this land, which I'm sure we will? And then secondly, if you can answer Nick's comments about the benefits to the county council.
So we'll, yes, we certainly will circulate the this land accounts, which will be pre their audit, I should say, and they will be consolidated into the version that I certify at the end of the month. I think Councillor Gay is right to draw attention to the narrative statement, and we will will take an action to have a further look at that ahead of the version that's certified. It's a complicated topic, the value of this land, and I know it's something that the Joint Administration is keen to look at. So I think there'll be a further detailed piece of work that comes forward on that as part of the company's submission of its business plan in September. To give you a feel for the value of the company, I think the amount on loan currently is 113 million, and the immediate assets of the company are probably worth in the region of 70 to 80 million. And we know through the previous due diligence work we've done recently that the kind of the development value and potential of the company is in terms of the sites they've got, the gross development value, it support about £400 million worth of development. But that's not to say there aren't medium-term risks with the business plan that this committee and Strategy and Resources Committee as the shareholder will want to take a close interest in. And it is right to acknowledge that whilst assets are under construction and development is ongoing, there is a development risk that comes for that developer. So it's a complex picture. It's certainly not a worthless proposition by any means, but it is an ongoing area and risk for the council that we will need to keep alert to.
Thanks, Tom. Nick, you want to follow that up at all?
No, that's fine. That's useful, but I would think it was quite concerning that your current valuation is about 70 to 80 million when the council is actually guaranteeing 115, 120 million pounds. And if the development does that mean that is a loss that we would have to sustain?
It doesn't necessarily flow through like that. I should say we haven't had this land independently valued, and the figure I'm referring to there is the assets it could immediately realise, and is off the top of my head as well to some extent. So I haven't got it immediately in front of me. So as I say, the development value of those properties is what provides the longer term value.
Just to come in on that and ask Tom a question, really. Within the accounts, obviously we've got development ongoing, so it's being valued, the work in progress is being valued at the lower of cost or net realisable value. Therefore, we're taking no profit once those are finished, the developments, and the profit will be taken. So it is a misleading situation at the moment, because the value is more, I presume the 70 million you're referring to is what we could get today if we sold the site as it is with no more development.
Yeah, indeed. And so work in progress is is the dominant feature of the company's balance sheet in some ways. So it may be, rather than me kind of speak further without having their accounts directly in front of me, we should pick it up in more detail once we have those available.
Okay, thank you. So we'll talk about this land accounts at our next meeting, Dawn. All right. Any other questions, comments on the accounts? I'm impressed that Chris has been all the way through it, and clearly others have looked at parts of it as well. Alison, is there anything further that because you understand about these things better than me, that you've picked up?
No, there isn't. Exactly the points that have already been raised, which I've moved off the page now, the exceptionally large figures, it would always be useful to have a note. Whenever we have an exceptional item which is so clearly different, it would just be nice, it saves actually having to ask the question in the first place. But it is about the fact that this has to be published. on the website. This has to be made publicly available to people who, to be quite honest with you, will look at this and say, what is this? What does this mean? And if anything, it leads to some of the misleading information which is actually put out there about the council because of the fact that people don't understand what's in here. You know, and if there was a way that we could actually represent that this really is not in the public interest, it costs a huge amount to create these documents, which are of so little value that if we could actually make representations to say it's time to review from beginning to end what is actually being provided to the public in a way which is truly beneficial to the public. You know, those of us who have an understanding of exactly what these figures mean, it's no problem. But we don't necessarily need to have it like this if there are other ways of then delving into the figures deeper if we need it. But for the people who we represent, we need to have something which is easy for them to understand, but not in a way whereby we have to ask you to produce something else for them.
Justin, do you want to comment on the fact that the guidance that you're working through is 1,000 pages long to start with? So that doesn't help.
No, when we publish this, and we publish it all together, it will be 250 pages, so it's even more impenetrable than what you're looking at the moment. But as we were discussing with Councillor Wilson yesterday, our guidance that we work to is 970 pages long. That tells us exactly what we have to do. So obviously the Redmond Review is talking about that additional statement that Councillor Bowden referred to. And yes, you know, we don't want something additional, but something that's understandable. It will be really interesting to see what proposals come out of that to try to take this to something that is readily understandable by a member of the public.
The narrative is, do you write the narrative following official guidance, or is that something that you've got a bit more freedom over?
Yes, we have to have a narrative statement, and it has to cover some of the you know, the sort of main things that happened, and it has to have performance indicators in it. So there is some guidance around it, but we've got a bit more freedom within that. Although the auditors could come along and ask us to add something extra into it. So, you know, as part of that process, if they feel there's not something in there that there's something else that should be represented. Do you want to add anything, Michelle?
It basically pretty much is what Justine was saying. There is guidance, there are certain areas that are expected to be covered in it, and the auditors would certainly raise it as an issue if there were areas that we weren't covering. They have less to say, obviously, if we're putting something in they think is unnecessary, because it is theoretically our statement. And we do try to write it in a more understandable way than the rest of the accounts. We are conscious that if anybody's going to, out there, that isn't an accountant is going to understand anything, we hope it will be the narrative statement, which is great that it's near the beginning. But it's still trying to describe some fairly complex situations. And there is a balance definitely to be had between the length in terms of making sure people understand what's going on and giving them enough detail, and losing them after page 4. There is a real balance to be had. And it is certainly an area that we would particularly welcome any feedback on how we could change, improve, simplify, because that is the area that we have the most control over.
Well, I think that's a challenge for you then.
Thank you, Chair. I'll rise to that challenge. Please make it shorter. And I say, I've read through it, but the shorter you make it, the more likely it is that people will actually read it. I know there's a limit to how short you can make it, but length doesn't actually achieve very much here. It just ends up putting people off. And I've seen some narrative statements from some councils, not in Cambridgeshire, I have to say, which are inordinately long and which are nothing more than a press release, it seems to me.
Okay. Well, if others have got suggestions on how to make the narrative shorter, that would be very helpful. I found that the most interesting bit, because I could understand that, and some of the other bits I did find a bit impenetrable. Right, thank you very much. So we have noted and commented on the draft county council elements of the council's Statement of Accounts 2020-21 prior to their incorporation into the council's full draft Statement of Accounts 2021, which are due to be published by the 31st of July. And then in September we'll see EY to hear about their audit plan. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on then to the Internal Audit Annual Report 2020-21. And Neil, this is your opportunity, or Mairead, to describe what you've summarised in this note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just first of all, I'd like to apologise for our non-attendance today, entirely due to isolation or isolating reasons, and we hope to be with you in person in September. So the Internal Audit Annual Report is for the Audit and Accounts Committee to consider the annual report for 2021 and to be made aware of the Head of Internal Audit's opinion on the state of the Council's internal control framework. This report forms part of the evidence that supports the AGS, the Annual Governance Statement, which you've already seen earlier at today's meeting. And you are requested today to approve the Annual Internal Audit Report. I think in summary, I just need to explain how we've arrived at the what we call the Chief Audit Executive Opinion. We've called it strong satisfactory, and we'll touch on the opinion definitions a little later. But what strong satisfactory means is that there are some control weaknesses that present a medium risk to the control environment. So what we're saying is actually there's some pretty good governance controls working within the organisation, or have been during 2021, but there are still some that present a medium risk. And this is underpinned from an assessment by us on the range of individual opinions arising from the work completed in 2021 by the internal audit team, which is attached to Appendix A, taking account of the relative materiality of each of those areas under review, and also considering management's response and progress in addressing any control weaknesses. The key piece of evidence upon which the opinion is based, in addition to that, is a review of the organisation's Code of Corporate Governance and the evidence that support the AGS. We review that annually. We review the key financial systems consistently, and they demonstrate a good or satisfactory assurance across all systems. I think we've already talked about the organisational response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's demonstrated the strength of the Council's business continuity and risk management processes, and the ability of the senior management team and the Council to respond effectively to this unexpected challenge. And Appendix B to the report summarises the JMT report. However, in previous years, internal audit has highlighted a number of contract management issues of individual projects managed by the Major Infrastructure Delivery Service. During the year 2021, at the service's request, internal audit carried out a full review of 4 major contracts, and we assessed the mid-capital programme governance as a whole. That work identified a fair few areas for improvement, but the positives are that the service has responded rapidly to those concerns, and action plans are well in progress to address the issues raised. I think it would be also remiss not to mention the high-profile issue relating to the tenancy of Manor Farm. Although this was first raised in 2019, there's no doubt that the impact of that of the impact that still had upon the council during 2021. So that's what really underpins the audit opinion of strong satisfactory. Just to in way further introduction, at the last meeting the committee commented quite rightly that there was insufficient narrative that outlined audit methodology, and that further explanation of the opinion ratings would be beneficial. Section 3 of the report outlines this for committee. However, I will caution that we're anticipating bringing some suggested modifications back to committee in September. We probably don't like the word satisfactory. We're thinking of something better to say. suggestions would be greatly appreciated. I think we've come with moderate so far. The report also outlines a number of recommendations made in the period and the extent to which those recommendations have been implemented, and I think that continues to reflect a very positive position. And it also summarises some of the impacts to internal audit itself of the coronavirus pandemic and details the work that we've carried out in the year, including fraud and risk issues. And finally, it's important that the committee and other stakeholders have confidence in the objectivity and competence of internal audit when placing reliance upon the annual audit opinion. So the report also outlines that we continue to be in full compliance with the public sector internal audit standards, and we do an internal assessment of compliance against that. And also just to confirm, as you'd expect, that continuing professional development of colleagues within internal audit continues to be a key focus, and we continue our workforce development strategy of bringing in audit and finance associates, SIPFA trainees, to provide for the future leaders of the Resources Directorate. So that's a very brief canter through the annual report, but just to say this summarises the 4 reports that the previous committee got during the year. So there should be nothing in there that people haven't already seen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to talk about what is in here, but something which isn't in here. And first of all, may I say I've got a great deal of admiration for the work which is done by Neil, and I'm not making any personal attack upon Neil or his staff. But I think that I'd like to make this point because I think it's a really important one. Mention was made of the tenancy of Manor Farm. What was much more important about that from my point of view in terms of what we've got in front of us today is that as a result of that inquiry, investigations took place which showed quite clearly that as far as county farms are concerned generally, and that county farm department, the control environment hadn't been strong enough for a long period of time, and that what control environment there wasn't complied with sufficiently. That clearly is, from the public information which has been given out, that clearly was the conclusion which was raised. And the question that raised for me in the context of this report we have in front of us is, if that has been going on for years within that particular department and hasn't been picked up by internal audit, then what other areas may there be in some other disparate part of the enormous enterprise that Cambridgeshire County Council is, where there may be similar weaknesses in the control environment, or there may be similar failures to comply sufficiently with what control environment there is. And what I would have liked to have seen in this report is a reflection by internal audit about the fact that the county farms deficiencies have now been identified in terms of control environment and compliance, but a reflection on how it could have been for such a long period of time that this committee continued to receive assurances from internal audit that generally controls were satisfactory or even better than satisfactory so far as the council is concerned. Clearly, my thought was maybe it's a matter of materiality, that the amounts, the particular concerns there might be in the county farms area wasn't deemed to be sufficiently material to have registered on the internal audit radar. But I thought it was appropriate, or would have been appropriate, for internal audit to have some reflection about how we ended up in the position that we did end up with. And I'm not saying this to attack by any means. I'm saying it to say, are there lessons which could and should have been learned, and why hasn't that been mentioned in our report?
Okay, so before I come to Neil, Alison, I think you've got something similar.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same, basically, as just been said. It certainly is not anything personal about any current or previous members, members of staff. What bothers me is that very often the problems that we don't know that we've got are the ones which come out and cause us this kind of problem. We rely upon the professional opinions that we're given to be certain. Now, obviously I'm new to this committee. I haven't seen all of the reports that have gone previously. I don't know how much has changed, but it is exactly that point. How do we know that I'm not talking about the individual people concerned, I'm talking about the processes and the controls. How can we be certain that we've covered them? And of course the fact that, obviously we really do need to be referring to the fact that we have dealt with the issues that have been raised in terms of the particular Farmgate issue. But what about everything else? It's a very complicated area that we've got. Are we completely certain that this could not be happening elsewhere?
Neil, do you want to answer that? And in a way, I'm disappointed that Tom has gone, because he perhaps could have been thinking as well about the unknown unknowns, if we're right with Donald Rumsfeld.
If I could possibly stay away from Farmgate and talk about the unknowns, that's exactly why the internal audit team comes to, for example, JMT, and comes to the audit committee each quarter to outline the proposed coverage within the organisation, because we as auditors are more than aware that we can't cover every single system every single year. So, by definition, there's always always the opportunity for governance failings to be happening in areas that internal audit is not aware of. However, we feel that we have quite a good network and relationships with senior managers and through the Audit and Accounts Committee to alert us to any concerns that those managers or members have regarding the governance of the organisation. And by coming each quarter and having a sort of dynamic, flexible audit plan whereby we target resources to those areas of highest risk, that means we can react more positively and more quickly to issues that are being raised. The next item on the agenda is also the whistleblowing item, and obviously audit would hope that members, colleagues within the organisation and partner organisations are aware of the whistleblowing policy and would raise their concerns through that whistleblowing policy, and again alert internal audit and by definition senior management to potential governance issues. But of course, members are correct. Audit cannot give the assurance that there are not other areas within the council that are experiencing governance and non-compliance issues. What we can give assurance around is that we have systems and processes that underpin the organisation's culture and the right policies and procedures to bring those to our attention so that we can react positively and give assurances to this committee. I think that's the best way I can respond to that Donald Rumsfeld question. Yeah.
Sorry, Chris or Alison, I think the difficulty is identifying a particular element of the business that we then look into in more detail. We're all worried that there might be something out there that we've not found, which relates to what's come from Manor Farm investigations, but without being able to target a particular bit that you think is a bit fragile or might not be quite as good as it could be, it's difficult to know where to go.
And isn't that the question, Chair? Yes. But it's more, to be quite honest, a question for the officers rather than for us. We're merely overseeing this rather than saying, why don't you look in that particular hole over there where we think something is going wrong. But I think there's a process to be gone through here. And the first process is a questioning as to whether our internal audit function failed in respect of county farms. Now, if it is not accepted that our internal audit function failed in respect of county farms, then I think that changes the line of questioning entirely. But my personal belief, and I could be wrong, and Neil will correct me if I'm wrong on this, I'm sure, but my personal belief is that our internal audit function failed, which caused the County Farms Department to be able to have such weak controls over a long period of time and such poor adherence to what controls that there were. Now, if internal audit did fail in that respect and continued to give the assurances year on year that we received, then that's where the reflection comes in, that if that failure took place, then is it possible that there could be other similar failures elsewhere, and where would be the appropriate places to look? And I'm certainly not going to start volunteering particular departments, I can promise you. But is it accepted that there was an internal audit failure here so far as county farms were concerned over a long period of time?
Well, interesting you should ask that question. I didn't think that was an accusation which was being made. I thought the weaknesses that were identified by Mazars were in the county farms teams associated with the behaviour of former councillor Hickford, and it was the two together which ran on for some time, which was subsequently uncovered and action taken to rectify further issues, initially by internal audit, but then subsequently by Mazars. So I'm happy to hear what Neil's got to say, but do you want to add something there?
Just to answer that point and to feed it through to Neil, what was quite clear from the 31 points which were raised and put into the public arena, it's quite clear that there were, whilst there were a number of actions, matters which were to do with that particular farm and that particular tenancy, clearly there was an underlying position of failure of internal controls which this partly exploited. But those failures of internal controls clearly were widespread across the county farms section, rather than being something which was specific to what happened with Manor Farm. So it's that more general failure of a control environment which the report highlighted, which I'm talking about. I'm certainly not talking about Manor Farm.
Yes, and that's why I was thinking that it was primarily a failure of the farms team group to deal with those governance issues, which, if you like, were not picked up by members or internal audit or anybody else. But Neil, do you want to add your two penneth on this?
Not really, but no. I think it's a tremendously fair question. I can't really answer it any other way but to say that I would welcome a review of how internal audit performed during that particular piece of work at the right time. You know, I'd fully support that type of open approach. My own view is that internal audit did not fail. My own view is that internal audit did what it was expected to do at the right time and responded appropriately. I have not myself read the Mazars report, but I certainly have seen the 31 recommendations that I am aware were based upon the internal audit work that was done in 2019, and I can't really go into much more detail on the Farmgate issues than that. But to say, you know, I would welcome that review, because if there are members on the committee who are concerned about the competence of colleagues within my team or me personally, I would want to assuage that concern.
Yeah, indeed, and I don't think that's what Chris or Alison or I are implying for one moment. I think the question that Chris was trying to say is, should we a few years ago have picked up that the county farms team were perhaps not running such a tight ship as we would expect them to, and was there any way in which internal audit could have picked that up before Roger Hickford even came on the scene, and before Lucy Nessinger put in her official whistleblower complaint? And if there is anything, the farms bit is moved on with the 31 recommendations plus the other things which are more confidential. But the issue which we're trying to get to now is, are there other parts of the business where we would need to be looking carefully to check that the appropriate governance and regulations and the like are being applied properly. Now, we don't know where to point you, unfortunately. We just know that we feel that there must be other places, because I can't believe for 1 minute that the County Farms team is the only team that is acting in the way in which they did. You've previously told us about the money that you're, and I can't remember the technical term, getting back, recovering from Skankska. Well, that, maybe that was an issue where we should have been on top of them sooner so that that didn't occur. But I don't know whether there is other topics. That's the difficulty.
No, it's a very fair challenge, Chair. But all I can do is to go back to the very first answer, which is that we can't possibly police the entire organisation every single year. We have to target our resources towards where we think governance could be an issue, or where we haven't looked for quite a while, or more often than not nowadays, where we're being pointed by members of from other intelligence that we need to have a look. All I can say is when we audited the service in question, it was done very promptly, and there was a number of recommendations made in the normal way at that time. And we're very pleased that the service has been proactive in picking up those recommendations and putting revised controls in place. And I'd also point to the audit report that we have in front of you today, that outlines a number of audit recommendations made across the organisation where governance improvements are deemed to be appropriate. And again, commend the management team for without any failings, always putting those recommendations in when audits have identified that there's a weakness. But I can't stand here and say that there are not areas that would benefit from an audit review. And again, that's why we would come back once a quarter to say, anybody got any other intelligence, any other information that would help us target our resource towards those areas of highest risk.
Yeah, exactly, and that really needs to be an action that we do try and have a think to inform the audit plan going forward. Mac.
Chairman, I'm having a bit of difficulty with the way this is going, because, and I think I would support what Neil is saying, because there seems to be an expectation that, or assumption, that audit should have picked up that there were weaknesses within the controls within the county farms. My understanding of it, and having read the whole report, there were clearly concerns being expressed within the county farms, which would subsequently suggest that audit ought to go in and have a look at it to see why those concerns have been raised, whether it's through whistleblowing or whatever it is. But there was a whole process which moved up outside of county farms, further up. Now, whatever the judgments are as to why there were a lack of or failings in the control system, there were controls in place, but the circumstances were such that those controls were not being managed properly. So that's why I'm having difficulty with this. I think, and we have to wait for another day to work out quite how they happen. So what I'm saying is, I don't think you can look at audit and say you should be policing every department in the county and keeping an eye on them. You are relying on that intelligence. That intelligence, in fact, some of that intelligence was shared. But whether it was acted upon remains to be seen. So what I'm saying is, I don't think we should be just simply saying, oh, that audit should have picked up, because that's the way it seemed to be, the line seemed to be going. Should have picked up that there were problems within the county farms controls and measures in place to make sure that they adhered. I hope that's not, but that's the way I just got the sense it was going. So I think we're treading on a bit dangerous ground here, going up at the moment in investigating.
I agree, and I don't think that's quite what Chris had in mind, but just
I'm a bit worried that...
Just clarify what you did mean.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to clarify, Chair. And yes, there's no criticism meant of our audit function or the staff that we have within it. What it is that clearly there was an issue with the control system within County Farms, and it's quite clear from just from the public recommendations, not talking about anything else, that was endemic within County Farms. It wasn't something which just materialised when Manor Farm became an issue. And my point was that given that that failure had not been identified through internal audit, has internal audit given any reflection on that and think, well, maybe there may be other areas where the same may occur? And I gave an example of why I thought it may not have been identified, and that was that probably in terms of the materiality that internal audit look at, it probably wouldn't have registered. And it was that sort of reflection which I was inviting, to see if internal audit had given any consideration as to whether there needs to be any adjustment in the way in which they look at things, so as potentially to find these things at an early stage rather than when it becomes a crisis.
Come back on that, Chairman. I understand the point you're making. My worry would be that materiality becomes a factor in it, because materiality to me is linked to the cost, the money involved, you know, whether it be 2%, 2.5%, whatever it is we do for the overall thing. Whereas controls and measures, as are you doing your job properly, which is more important. So materiality should not either engage it or stop it. It should be a case of, is there something endemically wrong in that particular department? So I think in that sense we're agreed. Yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head, Mac. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make.
Good. I think we're agreed. Right, with that unanimous agreement, and we welcome your report, Neil. Thank you very much for pulling it all together. It's a very comprehensive assessment of all the good things that you and your team have done over the last year. So thank you for that. The committee is asked to asked to approve the annual internal audit report, which we do. Excellent. The next item 7, is the whistleblowing policy, and you'll have seen that Neil and his team have updated the previous whistleblowing policy so that it's more concise and clearer, and it has been through the JMT, so the leadership team, and the unions for consultation, and they were all happy with it. So I'm hoping that we can agree that it's fit for purpose, and then we can certainly publicise it internally, if not externally. I can't believe that the press is going to be that excited at the moment. But Neil, do you want to just add any other points that you wish?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. I think you've summarised it very well there. The committee is being asked to approve the updated policy. It's a revised and strengthened whistleblowing policy aiming to embed confidence that concerns are taken seriously by the County Council. As you say, it's been reviewed and amended in consultation with the recognised trade unions and the Council's directors. There's no fundamental change of rights to staff under the policy, and the changes have been made to make the policy easier to understand and make it easier for potential whistleblowers to raise their concerns. The policy aims are now stated very much upfront on the cover page, and that cover also points to guidance on how to use the relevant policy, and those senior managers who can be contacted if a whistleblower has any doubts about raising a concern or how to proceed. I think importantly as well, the policy also signposts potential whistleblowers to other policies that may be more appropriate for them to use in raising a concern. And the flowchart at paragraph 1.2 makes it, we believe, easier for people to understand, or colleagues to understand, their referral is dealt with in the swiftest and most appropriate way. I think it's important to note that's because a serious concern will not necessarily always constitute a whistleblowing referral, which will be investigated under this policy. For example, there are separate processes for employees to lodge a grievance relating to their employment, or customers to complain about their service, or for anybody to raise concerns regarding whether councillors have breached the members' code of conduct. So we believe the policy is now clearer and signpost a lot better to the other policies that are in place within the council. And just to confirm, if it's approved today, we will embark upon a communication journey and strategy, and ensure that all members have a copy of the, for example, make sure all members have a copy of a new policy. And annually we do we call them pulse surveys now, but we will check with colleagues across the organisation as to their understanding of and awareness of the whistleblowing policy and any blockages that they've experienced in wanting to raise that or raise a concern. And probably that's a summary of the aims of the whistleblowing policy and why it's been refreshed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions?
And when you say the policy can be used by anyone, you mean any officer, any councillor, and any member of the public?
Yeah, and any contractor, anybody in the supply chain, any third party, basically any stakeholder of the organisation. It may be that when the whistleblowing comes in, it's then signposted to a different policy of the council, the most appropriate policy, but it's a catch-all to ensure that we get as much information and intelligence as we possibly can, so we can improve as an organisation. And it probably relates a little bit to the previous item. It's another area where internal audit would, or the organisation would, find out where there are potential governance issues that need addressing.
Okay. Any comments? Go on, Chris.
Thank you. Having an effective whistleblowing policy is, of course, essential for any organisation of any size. I have a concern that there's a general lack of understanding of what whistleblowing means, especially as far as the general public is concerned. And it's a term which has now got very wide circulation, but I think that people have a wider interpretation of what it means than it really does, and the paper we have in front of us makes it quite clear what the limitations are. And it's quite possible that in many cases an individual who wishes to raise an issue of concern and wishes to have the safety that they feel they have through a whistleblowing policy will seek to initiate a whistleblowing action, only to be told, sorry, no, that's not whistleblowing, that's a complaint and you need to go through a complaints procedure rather than it being whistleblowing. And my fear is that individuals might lose confidence if they feel that protection which they might regard whistleblowers as being given wouldn't necessarily apply to something which is just a complaint. So my question is, how will we ensure that where maybe you've got an individual wishing to make a service complaint or whatever, how will we ensure that we're not too negative to them when we say, sorry, this isn't a whistleblowing item, and how can we ensure that they are given the support they need so that the complaint in that particular case that they wish to make, that they've got the confidence to carry that through?
Neil, do you want to answer that, and we'll see what other questions come?
Yeah, it is something that we have discussed, pulling this particular policy together. And yes, you're quite right. If a complaint comes in under the whistleblowing guises, then you don't get the same protections that the whistleblowing policy would, or the whistleblowing guidance would actually give you. In fact, the whistleblowing guidance is pretty much for employees of the council, as opposed to members of the public. So the PIDA requirements do not afford the sort of same protections to members of the public in terms of anonymity. However, as an organisation, I can say that we strive to ensure the principles within the whistleblowing policy would be applied for any type of complaint that comes in wherever possible. But the appropriate service director or officer dealing with it would make clear at that point to the complainant, to the person raising the issue, exactly what will happen within that process to allow the individual to take a decision whether or not to progress. There's no easy answer, and it's something that I will take away again and maybe try and and answer it better. But you know, we have discussed it, and it's, you know, the whistleblowing policy has protections, but mainly for employees. That's as it is.
The difficulty, as I see it, is that this is trying to be a panacea that answers everybody's concerns. That if it was a whistleblowing policy for officers, that's different to a complaints policy for members of the public. Paragraph 1.9 is quite clear. It says, if you're not a council employee, the council's complaints procedure should be used to raise complaints about council services and activities. Members of the public can contact the council using the whistleblower policy to report any serious concerns or disclosures over wrongdoing. But there is a bit of a muddle there, I think. I know this is very unfair. There are 7 employees of the county council here. Do you feel comfortable with this new whistleblowing policy? Have you even had a chance to look at it amongst all your other work? Have any of you read the previous one? Were you aware the council had a previous whistleblowing policy? Come on, Justin,
yes, help
absolutely,
us out here. Absolutely. And actually, in the toilets in Shire Hall, though I'm sure you will all remember, there were signs put up on the wall saying who you should contact if you had any issues to raise. Yeah, I mean, I have read it. I did read it last night because I was a bit worried that this video link wasn't going to work and you were going to start asking me questions about it. Yeah, short and sharp. I mean, you know, I've got some experience of this in the past, having been a 151 officer elsewhere and dealing with these sorts of things on anonymity. And Neil's absolutely right that you go through that process. And I mean, I've sat with people and I've said, okay, look, this is where we've got to, and this is the point at which that anonymity stays or it goes. It's your, you know, it's, you know, I'm not going to, we wouldn't push anybody to do that. So it is an incremental step, but it doesn't mean you can't do anything. It's just about finding the right way forward through that. I mean, it's certainly short and sharp. I guess it doesn't, I can't remember what the old one looked like in terms of sort of the detail, but I didn't pick anything up that I thought, oh, that shouldn't be there, reading through it, but I don't know if others have got comments.
I will admit to not having read it until just now. So a little bit too quick a read to really comment, but I was aware that we had a policy previously, and certainly the aim of making it shorter and clearer is obviously a good one. As we were discussing with narrative statements earlier. In general, it's the same principle, and the inclusion of a flowchart into something that's quite complex, such as a policy, is usually a good move. So I would just say that, I think, at this stage.
Can I just also add, the other thing is there's quite a long list of people there that you can talk to, and I think that's quite an important thing, because there are circumstances where you don't want to talk to somebody for a particular reason because you think they're involved in it. So having that slightly longer list makes it, you know, that there is some accessibility.
I don't know what the signs in the toilets said, because I can't remember what they said in the gents or elsewhere. But clearly, if we're going to promote this, then there needs to be a summary and that sort of flowchart, and the key contacts is one of the most important things. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. It's always very difficult, because I think until you're actually put in the situation whereby you are the person who needs to raise a substantive issue like this, it's very difficult to know whether or not a policy is actually good or bad. And I suspect that it's unlikely many people will ever be in that situation. I have been in that situation, and I've been in that situation of having to deal with the most senior person in the business. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to actually have to do. Because you know full well, no matter what the policy says, about protections, the only protection you're going to get after you've said something is by going through court. And that is ultimately the real problem. And I don't think that this policy actually deals enough with the fact that that is exactly what happens to people. As much as we may say otherwise, the feeling always is, I am going to raise this issue because I have to raise this issue, and that is my career over. And that is the decision that many people who actually have knowledge that we very much want them to bring forward to us will actually be feeling. I don't say I know the answer to it. What I do know is this policy isn't the answer to it. The one part in there, which I now can't find, talks about the fact of going externally for help.
Page 251.
And then, you know, the fact that obviously you've got to make sure that you don't disclose anything which is confidential and so forth and so forth and so forth. What I would like to think is that, ironically, we very often say very challenging things about auditors, but actually our auditors are very much people who are able to deal with a lot of the things that are raised as being there. You can talk to them completely openly because of the fact that they do actually need to know everything that's going on in the business. And they're an external professional who should be able to support the people in the same way. It would just be interesting, and I've not seen it, but it's always been my thought that that is exactly the place that we should be directing people to who think that they really have a serious matter, not of a complaint issue, but of a serious matter about the governance of an organisation, you know, any organisation. And it would be wonderful if we could actually have that rather than actually directing them to the Protect advice line, where we're then saying, please don't tell them anything which is confidential. It would just be nice if we could do that. I can assure you that the policy is probably one of the best I've seen. It wouldn't have reassured me.
That's a difficult situation to be. Neil's telephone number and as head of internal audit is on the list of people that you can discuss your concerns with. Maybe he needs to be top of the list in order to get that anonymity pushed higher, rather than the assistant director HR services. And then the issue about raising things through the courts and contacting Protect or whoever else externally. What's your views on that, Neil? And when you were looking at other organisations' policies, what did you find from those?
Yeah, I think that's picking up the fear that that some colleagues wouldn't feel comfortable in picking up the phone or emailing me, which I can give an assurance if myself, Mairead, or any colleague within internal audit gets a whistleblowing query, we would deal with that effectively, professionally, and correctly, no matter what pressure we were being put under. That's a given. But of course, we can't always get that message across to all colleagues. This whistleblowing policy tries to do that. The communication will try to do that. But if, for whatever reason, that colleague still understandably, perhaps, is reticent about raising a serious concern, and an anonymous email is something that colleague can't do, then we do want to make sure that there are other avenues that can be pursued, because as an organisation we absolutely want to hear any concerns that colleagues have about the governance of the organisation. So that's why that's there. But we would obviously much prefer the head of audit to get that contact, because it can be dealt with more efficiently and effectively, quickly and quicker. So I understand the concerns, and that's exactly why that part of the policy is there, to sort of say, actually, if you don't feel you can follow it through in-house, then these are the other alternatives. It's a bit like the complaints policy. You know, the ombudsman is recourse there for members of the public. It's you know, it's a catch-all, and I think it demonstrates the organisational will to understand and actively you know, be proactive in finding out areas of concern of stakeholders to the organisation. But it's a whistleblowing policy. You know, and it's a cultural thing that needs to be adopted by the organisation, and we need to have a culture, which I feel we will have and do have, where colleagues feel comfortable in raising concerns.
Are you a bit more reassured, Alison, or do we ask Neil just to look at the external reference and involvement of the courts?
No, I think it would be, you know, it is about engendering generally that actually it needs to be someone, you know, more like Neil or the external auditors who are actually, you know, if you like, those external contacts. And I think, you know, comment that you made was perhaps Neil should be at the top of the list. I think that there is a great deal to be said for trying to get that point across, trying to get across that internal audit is an independent group, and trying to get across the fact that actually they can talk in that complete kind of confidence around that. I mean, clearly, you know, if it was something about Neil, then they would need to go somewhere else, and I'm not suggesting that there could be anything about Neil that they wish to raise. But I mean, it is, you know, it is to get that. What the problem is, and the problem always will be, that the sense, I remember going home and saying to my wife at the time, I have just had to, you know, I have just done something which means that I am going to lose my job. And that's what it felt like, and that's what it is. And in the you know, and when you have that kind of choice, the majority of people cannot make that choice.
Well, the majority of people wouldn't be brave enough to do it if that meant they were going to lose their job. Simone.
Thank you, Chair. I actually really welcome this whistleblowing policy. I know there was a previous one. I think what you've got to understand, I absolutely understand where you're coming from, Councillor Young, but there are different aspects of why people want to whistleblow. You know, it may be to do with personal reasons, that there's harassment, there's bullying. In that instance, they may want to go to HR because they are, you know, that's what they're trained in. They're trained in people. There might be other instances where policies or things are not going right within the governance. They go to another person. This list of people actually gives the whistleblower that option to pick who they think is suitable to deal with this problem. And also, if they cannot get a hold of them, there is an email. If they do not feel comfortable by phoning, there is an email. And I'm presuming the email will be picked up by who? Will it be picked up by all 7? Because at the moment, you've only got numbers for the 7. Are there email addresses? Just wanted to know where the whistleblowing at Cambridgeshire Gov UK actually goes to. You know, where are these people going to go, right, I'm emailing someone, but who is going to be receiving this?
That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm just smiling, Chair, because Mairead's just replied to me quickly and said, me. It actually comes into internal audit, and as our procedures are at the moment, Mairead tends to check those on a daily basis at least. So the email comes to the internal audit team. We sort of didn't want to put internal audit against it. We wanted to keep it, you know, not internal audited, but following the conversations today, we may reflect upon that.
Well, I think before people send something to it, they probably want to know who's going to be receiving it and opening it. So you could at least put in brackets to be opened by or read by the internal audit team, because that gives them the opportunity, if they feel that HR or somebody else would be more appropriate, they can go direct there. And people's email addresses are on CamWeb, or when you're using your Cambridgeshire email account, they'll pop up automatically, won't they? So I think that should be okay. Mac?
Thank you, Chairman. Do you not think that's covered in, if you look at paragraph 6.6, where it talks about internal audit lead and all whistleblower referrals, gives you the website, and it says, and ensure that referrals made to this address are forwarded for consideration by the appropriate process. It's the process which is important, yeah, to ensure that it gets to the right, you know, it's handled properly, and to make sure it gets it, rather than to the appropriate department. It's not, they're not saying that, it's the appropriate process, and I'm assuming that's used a bit of professionalism amongst the officers, to, particularly to Maria, to ensure that it is properly handled. So that's what I thought 6.6 to me, but maybe I've misunderstood it.
I think it does say that, but because other people haven't read it like that, I think we can probably look at how to make it clearer in a different part of the policy, because it's a very fair point, you know. But we will address that if committee wishes.
Yeah, I must admit, although I'd read it, I'd forgotten that 6.6 says clearly it's internal audit who's going to look at the corporate whistleblowing email account. Okay, well, I think overall we are supportive of this improved, concise and clear policy. We'd like you just to review, Neil, whether your name goes higher up the list of people to contact, and just think, perhaps not for this version, but for subsequent version, how we deal with whistleblowing issues which lead to subsequent court action, and whether other external support is should be advertised within this policy. So the other topic, just so that you are aware, the internal comms people prepared a draft, well, press release, media release, internal comms release on this topic. I've made some suggestions to amend it slightly, which Neil has seen, and I've copied to Nick. And after today's meeting, I will confirm that with internal comms, with a view to putting something out to all staff, and then updating, now that we know that they're there, or reminded they're there, the signs in the toilets and elsewhere.
That's the giant hall, though, so they need to be done again, don't they, when we get to Alconbury? But there will be some in other buildings, of course, that we're still in.
Well, having been to Alconbury yesterday morning, first of all, I can say how impressive it all is, but there are various very large areas that suitable policies could be plastered in the staff areas or in the public areas accordingly. Right, so I think we have come to the end of today's agenda. I'm just looking at the dawn just to make sure I'm not done anything else I shouldn't do. Or
did you just want to agree with the recommendation?
The recommendation is that we approve the draft whistleblowing policy, which we have with the... Wonderful, thank you very much. So that is the last item on today's agenda, and the next meeting is on the 28th of September. So have a good summer holiday, everybody, and let's hope the warm but not too hot weather continues for our various holidays. Thank you very much, Neil, for joining us, and anybody else who is still on the call, Murray and Dan, if Dan is there. I can't actually see who is there now. Anyway, okay, right. Thank you very much, and see you all again.